Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Ben, for that warm introduction. And the very mention of lockdown number 2 sent shivers down my spine, as I'm sure it did for most people. So a little bit more positive news, hopefully, yesterday with the promise of a vaccine. But we know we've got some challenges to come, and clearly we're not going to be out of troubled waters for some time. So hopefully today's session is really, really useful for you. So quick introduction: I am Martin Shelford, and I co-run Team Mango with Sarah. And today we are going to be focusing on the top trending people challenges that we've seen across the sector, not just in the Southwest, but across the UK and Europe as well. We're all sort of in the same storm, I think is a good analogy, but in different boats. So we're kind of facing some of the same challenges, but at different points. So hopefully we can cover off some of those things for you today. Today we've got some brilliant partners that we get to work with on a day-to-day basis joining us as well. So I'll introduce the panel soon. But before we get there, you'll notice a bit of a change in branding in the next few weeks. So just be aware, Team Mango is going to be retired in the next 3 weeks. And we're going to be launching or rebranding to a company called Rocco. So if you want to find out more about that company, go to www.roccopeople.com and you'll find out more information over the coming weeks on that front. Before we get started, I'd just like to welcome our panel. So we have the fantastic Katie, who is an inclusion and cohesion specialist and founder of BCohco, doing some brilliant work around diversity, inclusion, cohesion, and equality, framed as DICE. So she's going to be doing a talk for us a little bit later. Amy, equally excellent Amy, who's a psychologist by trade and co-founder and CEO of People Matter, is going to be joining us for a session soon. And then also Gareth Edwards from the fantastic VWV, who are legal partners to tech businesses. And then from our own team, Sarah, Matt, Danielle, and myself. Apparently you can't see the slides, so I'm just going to try and fix that technical problem a second. So bear with me. Okay, if I can just have a yes or a thumbs up, if anyone can see that slide, that'd be great.
Yeah, we can, Martin.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Ben. I appreciate that. So yeah, just to run through, Katie at the top left is from BCohco, who's going to be joining us soon. Amy, founder of People Matter, is going to be joining us in the second session. And Gareth and Sarah are going to be kicking off in the third session. We also welcome today Matt, who is one of our resourcing partners at Team Mango, and Danielle, who is one of our people leads as well, who's going to be talking about one of our long-standing partners, clients, Unai, and the work that they've been doing around cohesion and outcomes and output management. So just to go through the format before we dive into it. So I guess really the positioning here is that, we've lived with COVID for 6 to 8 months now. It was a pandemic that not many companies can say they really properly foresaw or, planned for, and it's been difficult. And one thing that's been really good is to see how companies have come together to share ideas and challenges and actually, help each other through that. I guess, for a lot of companies in the last 6 to 8 months, it's all been about survival. It's been making sure that cash is protected and their people are protected, so that ultimately we still have a business to run post the pandemic. But for a lot of businesses now, it's really about how we sort of push forward and how we sort of navigate our way through, what is turned a new norm and ultimately become successful in the long run. So we're trying to position that short, medium, and long term. So to do that, we have 6 really fantastic sessions that we're going to be focusing on today, each lasting around 8 minutes and hopefully wrapped up in just over an hour's time. The first is all about protecting our business and people, and we're going to be bringing Gareth and Sarah in to talk to us about how to reduce overheads while sustaining our culture, taking that difficult action in the short term whilst prolonging the long-term viability and culture within our business. And then secondly, protecting our people, we're going to ask Amy to join us to talk about mental health, which in itself is a massive topic, but we're really going to try and focus on the use of data in helping well-being across our teams and for ourselves in the future. And then we kind of hopefully navigate through that survival mode into let's navigate our way forward, progressing forward. We have 2 sessions we're going to focus on here. First and foremost, we're going to ask Danny to join us, who's going to talk to us about maintaining outputs and cohesion and actually reel some specific examples of what one of our customers, Unai, have been doing in the last 6 months that hopefully will be useful for a number of you. And then number 4 session, we will be looking at the ever widening skills gap. And that is something that as the market for recruitment has started to recover, about 90,000 vacancies in the the UK in tech in August alone. We are finding that is becoming more and more difficult. So Matt has got some really good tips there for how companies can get ahead of that curve. And then finally, as we've really moved past and COVID's become a thing of the past, we can really focus on becoming a productive company and a force for good. We're going to be looking at diversity inclusion now and the role that it has at the core of our business and our strategies, before we wrap up with a pre-recorded video by myself on developing and promoting our best people into leadership positions. So without further ado, I'd just like to welcome Gareth and Sarah into the room. Give me a hello to say that you've joined, please.
Hello.
Getting used to it. I've got Sarah. Is Gareth on? I can't see you, which is why I'm asking. So I'm relying on audio. Great. So thank you. So the unfortunate reality is that a business, a lot of businesses, not just in the tech sector, are still having to come to terms with the need to make changes in their teams. And being blunt, that means restructuring and redundancies so that we can reduce overheads and ultimately still have business at the end of the pandemic. So given the economic uncertainty of the next few months, we just wanted to spend a little bit of time with you guys talking about, what's going on out there, what trends are companies facing, but really get into, how can companies really protect their culture and viability of their businesses beyond having to take necessary action first of all. So first question, I guess, to Gareth, if you could just give us a little bit of insight into what's happening out there at the moment. What kind of trends are you seeing around restructures and redundancies in the tech sector?
Thanks, Martin. I think it's quite an active area. Obviously, there's been a lot of change and pressure on organizations of every level over the last 8 months now. And there's a real pressure on cash at times in terms of cash flow and in relation to demand in view of the containment issues and changing markets. I think that's obviously led a lot of organizations to review their resources and to look at how they respond to change. Some of that change is about repurposing things and repurposing people to do new jobs, but obviously there's also a huge pressure to look at costs and how costs can be managed. It doesn't always mean redundancy. Obviously there can be different ways of working and different ways of partnering with people, and there's been a lot of that. There's been a lot of use of the furlough scheme in terms of trying to get some cash into the business for payroll purposes. And I think the other thing that we've seen, as well as them moving towards redundancy and restructuring, is there's quite a lot of pressure on the senior leadership teams of these organizations. And people are having to learn new skills at high speed. And sometimes people are not always seem to be fully equipped to be able to deal with the next phase of their organization. So there's quite a lot of challenge coming from investors and founders who are seeking to make sure that they've got the right people in the right place to their senior leadership teams about whether they've got the right skills and whether they've got the right ability to take the organization to the next level. So a huge amount of change and a huge amount of challenge for everybody.
That's fantastic insight, and I think really critical point there you made about investors. I think one of the trends that we are seeing is that a lot of SMEs are clearly going to their incumbent investors, their existing investors, and seeking support to help through to potentially bridge to what could the next round, and that has led to investors, particularly VCs, taking a bit more of a hand in the actual micro level of the business and what they're doing around structures, and in some unfortunate cases forcing those things through. So whether it's something that's by the choice of the founding team or the exec, or whether it's enforced by the leadership team, I don't intend on us spending too much time on this one, but if you could just remind us of some of our legal obligations and considerations when we do have to face potentially a redundancy or restructure situation, that would be really good.
Sure. This is the terms and conditions part of this session, isn't it? So I think when you're looking at redundancies or restructuring, or trying to have discussions with employees about how they maybe change what they're doing and respond to a restructure, then ultimately from an employment law perspective, you're managing two key risks around whether you've got a fair dismissal, and secondly, whether people feel that the decisions you're making, the choices you're making, are in some way discriminatory. So those would be the two main challenges you're trying to navigate. And I've probably got 5 or 6 just bullet points just to how you might navigate that. So I think the starting point when you feel that you need to look at restructuring and or potentially redundancies is to make sure you've got a clear rationale for why you think there are redundancies. Is it truly a redundancy, or is it a performance issue? Just being very clear as to what your rationale for change is, and then thinking through how many people that impacts, because if you have more than 20 in any organization that it impacts, then potentially you have another layer of collective consultation to worry about as well. But I'm going to focus on individual consultation for the rest of this, on the basis that most teams are looking at less than 20 at any one time. I think you then got to look at, once you start to make these decisions, who's going to be involved in that decision making, so that you've got a real clear chain of command as to who's going to be thinking about the redundancy, who's going to be looking at implementing it, who, for example, is going to do some scoring if you have to have identify pools for selection in terms of reducing the number of people you have in one particular area or across a number of areas. What are those selection criteria? How do you make sure that they're tailored to your business and properly reflect, so you are able to then say that you've retained the best people for the job that you need doing going forward? And in terms of then having, if you've got more than one person making those decisions, that they all understand the criteria and they're all singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of how they come to apply that. You then look at whether you want to go straight into essentially compulsory redundancies, or whether there's an opportunity to ask people for sort of voluntary redundancies. Do people want to volunteer or want to look at things differently? And is there a space to have that dialogue before you then move into telling people they're at risk of redundancy on a formal basis? As well as looking at whether you've got a redundancy situation and how you might go about implementing it, you also need to think about the redundancy costs. You've got to be able to ultimately be confident that you can finance the notice period in terms of giving someone notice, and also a statutory redundancy payment if they've got more than 2 years service, and there's a statutory calculation that you go through to come at a figure. And then I think the final thing is to then think through the process, because when you're managing your unfair dismissal risk, as well as having a key reason as to why you're potentially going to dismiss somebody, you also then need to make sure you've got a fair process. And that process is all geared around consultation with the individual. So when you start a process, you shouldn't be informing them they're redundant. You should be starting by saying that they're at risk of redundancy and these are the circumstances. And then there's a period of consultation, usually on a one-to-one basis, to work through the reasons for that, whether there are any alternatives to redundancy and what the implications might be for that individual. So there are quite a few steps. They're quite well traveled these days in terms of settled case law and the expectations of both employer and employee, but it's worth bearing in mind at the beginning that you map out exactly why it is that you're having a redundancy situation, getting rid of any extraneous stuff around performance or otherwise, and essentially therefore why you want to reduce the number of people in that particular team or in the organisation for doing that particular type of work, and then work through the various steps as to how you would then want to implement it.
Brilliant. Hugely valuable advice, as always, Gareth. I just want to remind you about your charitable condition around mentioning the word furlough is £20 every time you mention that word. So I counted 40 quid. The points here, I guess, is, we don't want to dwell on, the difficult things, but there is that, essential consideration here around businesses and their legal obligations. We don't want to find ourselves in tricky waters down the line with tribunal risk and things like that. So I know that you, as the rest of our team, are always happy for people to reach out just to get a little bit of advice. We'll share your details at the end for that. So moving swiftly on into hopefully a bit more positive thing. I mean, dealing with these kind of things is one of the most hard things that we face as leaders and as business owners. And I think we've seen a number of really strong characters, strong CEOs, truly affected to the core by having to make people redundant. And really the main thing then is, how do we draw a line and how do we move forward in a positive fashion so that we can actually protect the business and the rest of our team beyond that. So I just want to bring Sarah in here and ask you a question about, how do you see tech SMEs navigating this restructure and cutting costs in a way that doesn't really jeopardize their long-term culture?
Yeah, no, absolutely. In terms of protecting culture, I guess the first tip from us really would be that try and avoid making several changes, because obviously the impact on change for people is massive and people have different reactions to it. I think we've got a slide coming up now, which actually will show you the change curve. Can you go on to the next slide for me? Fantastic, thank you. So the key point is to actively manage people through change. This often gets lost. So once you've actually done the process bit, people forget about the cultural focus, the people part of it. And it's important to do that because obviously that can have impact on morale and productivity. And ultimately, you want to help people get through that change curve as fast as possible. So the change curve you can see on that diagram, and we can send out later to you as well, really maps out the emotions that people have when they go through a change. And it helps you to understand why people are acting a certain way. But people often ask us, what does that practically mean about managing change? What do I actually do? So we have 5 steps that help you actually navigate to help people get through that change as fast as possible. And the first one is very much about creating that alignment. So make sure everyone knows what the future looks like, knows what your goals and objectives are, and you create that excitement. The communication part, maximizing that, is really about having an open, transparent communication line and regular feedback that team members feel they've got a voice. And then in terms of sparking motivation, it's really understanding what motivates your people, how you can get them to develop and really see what's interesting for them in the future. And then in terms of capability, I think Gareth mentioned that earlier, but it's really about, okay, what does the org design of the company look like going forward? What does my role have? What's my part to play in that, basically, and what skills and experience do I need to be able to get to that? So creating that excitement again. And then finally, that sort of knowledge share and really kind of spreading that positivity as you come out of the change. And ultimately, it's about getting through that change curve as fast as possible. And this process will help you get there. So appreciate that's quite a speedy thing to go through, but it just gives you a bit of practical tips there about managing change.
No, that's really helpful. I mean, this is a massive topic we talk hours about, and I know you're happy for people to reach out. I guess the biggest thing here that, actually some of the most positive change, the most positive advancements in society have come from, difficult periods, and there's no reason why, that won't be the case in this. But I think from your discussion, it's recognizing that everyone's a human being, and we don't all navigate that change curve in the same way, or certainly at the same speed. So we have to be very aware of this, but equally giving them that real focus and and purpose, I guess, really does help people to adapt to that new norm and to become productive and happy in the mid to long term. So thank you both, Gareth and Sarah, for that. So we're now going to move into the next session, and I'm going to invite Amy, who is a psychologist by trade and co-founder and CEO of People Matter, and they're doing some fantastic stuff around how we can practically support well-being in our teams, but also for ourselves using data and using management insights. So as you're swapping around, hopefully Amy is joining the stage. I just want to kind of introduce. So it really should come as no surprise to anyone, I guess. The longer we face the pandemic and the uncertainty of the future, the more people are susceptible to things negatively impacting their mental health. And this isn't an issue that just affects a small number of people. This is something that we're all susceptible to. And actually what we're finding increasingly is that leaders and founders are struggling with their mental health themselves, because not only do they have the burden of themselves and their family, but they also shoulder the burden of their teams as well. And that's something that's difficult for everyone to do. Clearly mental health and well-being is a huge topic, and we could spend ages on this, but actually what we'd like Amy to really talk about today is how we can how businesses can exploit the use of a data-led approach to improve their team's well-being. So I just need to switch over to the slides, and hopefully Amy, you can hear me, and and you'll be able to confirm that you can see the slides. Is that switched over?
Not just yet, I'm afraid. Oh yes, it's good. Yeah, and you can hear me.
Good.
Okay? Yeah,
I can hear you. Okay, so just ask next slide, please, when you want to move forward.
Okay, good, thank you. And hi everyone, it's great to see so many of you here today. So yeah, Amy King, I'm going to give a fairly whistle-stop tour in terms of things to think about in your business when it comes to mental well-being, but really specifically around burnout. It's something that I have experienced personally, and I'm sure many of you have gone through different signs and symptoms yourself at different times. But I think particularly in today's world, it's something that's becoming more and more common, and it's actually a really difficult thing to really pinpoint unless you take a data-led approach, because it can often fester without you really realising. So if we move to the next slide, the starting point for us and why we exist is in recognition that there is genuinely a very complicated world that we have built by design, but also by accident. We found ourselves in an always-on world of technology. We've got globalization, we're constantly connected, and the pace of change now, as Sarah was really just starting to talk through, is extreme. So whereas in your business before, you could plan and predict a lot more and have time to adjust to these changes, businesses are now really feeling the pain and the strain on having this continuous sense of change. It's emergent and it's fluid, And that not only impacts how you organise yourselves, but actually it creates a real challenge in terms of mental well-being, because naturally there's more anxiousness, uncertainty and stress. And the question is, how do you not just muddle your way through that, but how do you start to find a way through that is more well-informed and more purposeful so that you can thrive? So that's really what we specialise in. And if we move to the next slide, that would be great. And really the aim for this is, if you think about your business today, you will be pretty well versed in your business potential. You know, how do you navigate the current economic, social, societal, technological situation so that you can perform as a business? But in order to fuel that potential, you ultimately need your business and your culture to feel really healthy. You need energy, and that comes from people. And what the research shows is, if you invest and work your way through building a sustainable culture, so not one that just sparks and then drops and everyone burns out of it, but one that time and time again can maintain the level of performance and pace that you want, then you're much more likely to drive revenue growth, and you're much more likely actually to see that stock growth that you want to see. And you know, I run a startup, I know how difficult it is, and there is no perfect answer per se. But part of the core of getting this right is that you have a capability set in your leadership team. You have tools in your business that allow you to see where you're at a given time. And then ultimately you're empowering people to be able to get the right support, signpost and understand when they're at risk, but also to kind of flip that so that people can find pathways to be at their best. And if we move to the next slide, that would be fab. And where this goes wrong is where the everyday demands, and sometimes they're just lots of micro stresses, just build and build and build to the point where that energy depletion comes too much. So your energy that you have to cope with all the different things in a given day can no longer ultimately meet the demands that are being faced, that are being thrown at you. So burnout occurs really when all these drains, all these kind of micro stresses drain us to the point where we can't cope. It's that simple in terms of formula. And the thing that happens here is it's a spiral. It's not something that happens immediately. It's not something that you can just recover from a long weekend. The stress response that the body produces has become so chronic and has started to deplete all your resources to the point that you are no longer effective in being able to deal with the situation at hand. So you get into the survival mentality, you start to disengage, you withdraw, and then everything starts to drop as a result of that. And the challenge when you're a business leader, business manager, or even if it's for yourself, is it's often hidden. People will, show up every day and particularly remotely try to maintain that pace for as long as they can because they want to be able to show up for the business. So it can be very hidden, and research shows that I think only half of people really put their hand up and say, I'm struggling and I need help. And when it's left for too long, really three things happen. People leave eventually because they just can't hack it anymore. People will take time off, which is absolutely fine to restore obviously energy, but often it's excessive and it can be avoided is the point. 1 in 2 stress and absence days are due to poor mental health and stress. And the third thing that can happen is people are showing up, so they're turning up to the Zoom meetings or working through whatever they are, but they're not being productive. They're kind of just drifting along, and again that can undermine your culture, your performance, everything you're trying to achieve as a business. So if we just move through to the next slide, that'd be great. So our tact with this and really what we specialize in is by bringing data to the fore in a way that we can understand not just core metrics that you're probably familiar with, such as engagement. Engagement is a state of flow where you feel at your best and you've got that really positive sense of challenge and time just runs away, which is extremely important. If you can start to reveal some of the risk factors, which are environmental, what is actually happening in how your business and how you're operating, how are people really truly feeling from a stress and energy perspective, you can start to be able to take preventative action before it gets to that point. And you can also look for opportunities to allow people to thrive and ultimately your business. So that's really our tact and what we do. So just to bring this to life, we move to the next slide. This is how we work with organizations to not not just find those pathways to move forward, but to continuously identify where you're at a given point in time. So we specialise in building intelligent mental wellness tools, which in essence means we bring together the psychology of what helps us succeed and fulfil our potential, along with data science and technology, so that we can provide that tool set to enable your people and your organisation. If we move to the next slide. And the way that we think about this is, imagine Fitbit, no one was really tracking steps 10 years ago. It became a new thing. It was, how fit am I based on how many steps I'm taking? That was a really simple measure. And the challenge with mental health is, well, what is that measure? How do you really get a view of not just poor mental health, but positive mental health? So we take a data-led approach. The other piece for us, which is really important to supporting a positive wellness culture, is how do you make it more smart? How do you personalize actually what your culture needs, or for as an individual, how do you support a specific challenge which is really specific to you? And the third piece, which is key, if you're ever looking to measure mental well-being in any shape or form, is it has to be really carefully thought through in terms of the ethical practices that you're putting into place. So ethics and trust are key. And the way this plays out, if we move to the next slide, is, just move through, is we ultimately work with data that already exists within your business. So if you imagine every single day you are working online, you are leaving a footprint of all the different things that you're doing, and that data trail is leaving kind of clues and tells a story around, have you got a healthy working dynamic or not? And more of this data is often being used for negative purposes. You're being manipulated for social media, or you're being marketed to. Our thesis is, what if you can flip data on its head and help the individual and help build more sustainable cultures, like I said. So in essence, we work with organisations to really look at the inner workings of your digital culture. Is it healthy or not, based on data that already exists? And if we move that through again, there's a few different ways that this manifests in terms of the product set. So for the individual, you can get all sorts of toolkits today that help support positive well-being, but we provide a mental wellness companion called Akina. And Akina allows you to track and measure your mental well-being like a Fitbit would, in a completely private way. So this is absolutely essential. If you're thinking about any wellness solution in your business, you have to think about, do people trust it? Can they remain private? And how transparent is it overall? So Akina is all those things, and it allows the individual to not just see where they're at, but get, off the back of those scores, personalised recommendations of what you can do to improve your mental well-being. And on the next slide, and that kind of builds out further to say, as always, you have to engage trust from the get-go. So any insight you provide, you have to ensure that people trust it. Sorry, Martin, next slide. And for the organisation, just kind of flip this through, this is really important, because often within your business, you are probably relying today on snapshot feedback. So once a year, it could be pulse surveys once a month, maybe even a quick check once a week, but they're very snapshot in the moment, and then you're retrospectively acting on that. The best way to think about continuous cultural improvements to the wellbeing space is to be able to have a constant read of not just where people are at, but how that environment is impacting them. So through Akina, if your employees then share their data, you're able to get a continuous feedback loop between you and your people, and to be able to say, what can we do and what can we target to ensure that people can be at their best? And where are our risk factors that could be undermining how people are feeling, which can lead to things like burnout? So just in terms of what this looks like from the organisational perspective, if we move through, if employees choose to share their data, there is also an organisational dashboard available. Sorry, Martin, can you just pop to the next slide? We're going to pop through the next ones quite quickly. So this is just to bring to life what is possible within the mental wellness space. Often it's thought about as very, I think, fluffy, and it's difficult to know where to start. But by creating a cultural dashboard for your business, you can get a wellness index at any given point in time, which is, okay, how are we tracking? And based on the initiatives that we're putting in place, are we seeing a remarkable improvement in how people are feeling? But not only that, I'm not sure if you can see this clearly, but there are areas within this model that you can start to say, well, why is that? Is it down to the level of pressures that people are experiencing? Have we got enough positive boosts that are helping to drive people to be at their best? Is the emotional state healthy today? And from a behavioural perspective, are people, walking the talk? Are they genuinely looking after their well-being? Are they setting healthy boundaries? Are they switching off when they need to? So through this dashboard, you're then able to really say, how does this track over time? But also really specifically, if you're looking to put anything in place to support your people, what is going to be most pertinent and most important at any given point in time? And that is often what's missed, is it gets a very blanket approach. Let's do something and anything, which is better than nothing, clearly. But to get really targeted, you have to have data. And to give you a feel for this, I'll flick through the next slides quite quickly. So if we just move to the next one, you can start to look at this from a trend perspective within a specific area. So this is an example of where calm is really a measure of, are your people feeling really anxious or are they feeling grounded? And how has that looked over time? So if you're going through change and transformation, if you're going through these kind of weird periods of COVID, how is it truly affecting people? And are there any particular parts of your business that are really feeling it more than others? And that's where you can look at hotspots. In addition, if we move to the next slide, with data, you can start to say, what are the specific areas that require action? So through organizational insight, you can say, here's where we're at, but then specifically, what are the goals? And that's the overall intention here, whether it's through a toolkit such as I've talked about with what we do, or through your own measures and through your own take, you can start to take action on an intervention, understand the change and the impact of that change, review the effectiveness, and again, through insight, review what are the new goals we want to set ourselves to improve our overall culture as a whole. And that will help to ensure that you're not getting the point where you've got burnout, toxic cultures, and it's so key when you're working through growth, change. As a startup, you're constantly twisting and turning. It allows you to create a conversation with your people around what you're going to do about it and why those actions are being taken. So I think that's pretty much everything. I don't, Martin, yeah, just final point I think there was, with the wellbeing agenda, just try not to get stuck in the reactive something wrong zone, which is the bottom left-hand corner. You want to keep it connected to why you should care within your business, your leadership team behavior, and what your business is trying to achieve. And the core way to get it to the top right-hand corner is, yes, it's strategic. You link it to what you're trying to achieve, but it's also data-led, so you can link it to your cultural activity and what you're trying to really improve as a whole. So I know we're out of time, and I know that was a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it gives you a flavour in terms of things to think about, things to avoid, but also where there is actually a huge opportunity through technology, data, innovation to do more within your business. So please do get in touch if you have any more questions. But thanks, Martin.
That's brilliant. No, that's absolutely excellent, and I'm always fascinated. I'm a little bit concerned about your well-being. Actually, it sounds like you're about to lose your voice. So I think you need to lost kids or something, don't you? So no, really appreciate that. That's really good. And the things that stand out for me really is that taking a much more strategic, proactive effort at this. I mean, people are our greatest asset, our greatest resource, and as we know in Bristol region, we are fortunate. One was fortunate or for effort that to be one of the most productive regions in the UK, if not the most productive tech in the UK, and that's something that we want to maintain. And clearly, we want people to be productive, and there is a direct correlation between mental well-being and productivity, as we know when we look at things like absence stats, but also output per day, output per hour as well. So there's definitely a place for a better use of data and insights into the future. And I know you'll be happy to share more with the audience if they reach out to you. We'll share your contact details at the end. Brilliant. So we're going to move on. We are running slightly behind, mostly because we had a bit of a staggered start actually. So we're going to adjust one of the sessions. We pre-recorded 2 sessions in case of this eventuality. So what we'll do is drop 1 or 2 of those and send them to you afterwards, and be mindful of your commitments and seek to finish by 1 o'clock still. So the third session, I'd like to invite Danny Danny from our team actually, and we're going to now move forward into, we've protected our people, protected our business, hopefully, we've survived this difficult period. It really is now to focus on navigating our way forward, and really what we want to do is maintain the outputs and cohesion within our team. So hopefully Danny is joining okay and you can say hello, but I just wanted to kind of introduce this. So just how do we maintain cohesion and outputs when everything has been thrown up in the air, everything's uncertain? One major trend has clearly been the forced transition to remote and hybrid working practices, which for a lot of businesses has forced them to reevaluate things like how they communicate and how they govern priorities and how they make sure people are doing what they need to be doing, etc. So 7 months in, most teams have grasped how to do this, but what about the long term? And the temptation for a lot of businesses now is to start shutting offices and saving the overhead that comes with having rent, rates, electricity, utilities, etc. But you've only got to explore the GitLab story if you're not aware of them. They are one of the world's largest fully remote employers, and how much it has taken to be effective in fully remote working. For example, they have a 2,500 page handbook of rules and procedures for individuals to follow. So again, massive subject, but I'd just like to introduce Danny, who has got a lot of first-hand experience of working with SMEs in this route. And there's a couple of questions. The first question to Danny, can you just say hello so I know you're with us?
Hopefully you can hear me.
You are brilliant, thank you. So the first question was, just given your experience in this field, working with a lot of separate businesses on this front, do you have a view on the kind of general risks or considerations that tech businesses should be taken into account when they're making mid to long term decisions over potentially hybrid working or fully remote working in the future?
Yes, so thanks for the introduction. So I think it's making this transition is to make sure you've got sight of the potential people challenges. So it's very easy just to kind of rush ahead and make the change, but actually what could those challenges be? And we know from this year, in one way or another, people, businesses have been impacted by COVID. We've been thrown into juggling work-life balance at home with, with children, with dependents, people living on their own, not being able to see loved ones, and having to stay productive through all those distractions have been really challenging. Through this time, I've had a lot of people say, we're in the same boat, but actually how I like to think of it is we're not all in the same boat. We're navigating through the same storm, but our boats are very different and we have different concerns and challenges at different points. So it's also very, we're very, very busy juggling lots of things. And when we're spinning so many plates, it's really easy to start dropping some of those. And this could mean, cracks in communication, not taking care of your people properly. This then leads to burnout. They don't feel supported. They're very unclear on priorities. And this ultimately leads to a lot of confusion. Maybe you'll have retention issues, and this all causes instability ultimately. So there's risks around that. And you've really got to be empathetic. You've got to be willing to really support your people through the peaks and troughs of well-being, and not just actually delivering through action as well.
That's brilliant, thank you. I love that metaphor as well. We're all in the same storm, but in very different boats. So I think that's definitely true. So it's really, really clear that in this transition, what we need to do is probably achieve three things. So we really need, sustainability in what we're doing, consistency and discipline to make sure that, we're maintaining the same level of outputs and we're working well as a team, not just as a collection of individuals. One of the main questions that we always ask ourselves as businesses, so what? How do we connect maybe initiatives that we do around our people with outcomes? What benefits do we see on the bottom line in our business? So with this in mind, have you got any specific examples of maybe a customer that you work with that have navigated their way through this period quite successfully, and maybe what 2, 3, 4 things did they do, and what were the outcomes of the things that they did?
Absolutely. So we're working with a business called Unai. They are a tech consultant, provide software engineering and data science to organizations to drive positive change. And we've actually been working with them for the last 1.5 years on all things people. They're based in Bristol, and they are about a team of 40. And there is already a mix within the team of people who work from home and also office-based workers. So, you could say that for some of them, they are quite familiar with this way of working already. But in terms of specific tactics and outcomes that we've been working on with Unai is really around sort of 4 key things. So one of them, first one being partnering with their line managers. So we hold a monthly meeting with managers to try and get a temperature check on their teams and really understanding what the challenges are, making sure we hear feedback and we're able to act on it. And this helps the exec really focus forward and look after the team. And as a result of that, we're really now making sure that we've got really consistent one-to-ones that go much deeper than just operational or transactional conversations. Actually, we need to cover well-being. What can we do to help them? What are their challenges? Flexible and having that really human approach. They're also investing in lead developers through our bespoke leadership development program. And this really helps in terms of spreading the load in supporting others, but also equipping our seniors to have the right skills around coaching and mentoring, which is particularly useful as they bring on more junior members for the future. We've also been making sure that we survey our team regularly. And this is really, really important because, as I mentioned before, we all have different challenges at different points, and we need to make sure that we're ahead of that and we know what the trends are. And we're also acting on that feedback as we get it in real time. So a result of that has been actually increasing the number of all hands meetings that we do, so that people are really clear on what we're trying to achieve and what progress is being made as a business. And lastly, we embedded OKRs with Unai at the end of last year, which resulted in having a set of governance boards that help us track and keep abreast of those really key priorities that we really need to focus on. And that's been really great because that's sort of a space for us to debate and communicate what are those key priorities, particularly when we're so busy spinning all those plates. It's really easy to to drop some of those or to get not be as disciplined as we could be. So it's all about using those governance boards to make sure those key priorities stay. And for me, it's really about keeping the main thing the main thing.
What a way to finish. Keep the main thing the main thing. I love that. That's either Jim Collins or Vern Harnish, isn't it? I can't remember which one now. So brilliant, Danny. I think, I guess Unai are one of these companies that, they're not the most well known actually in the region. There's lots of companies that are very, a lot more well known. But actually they're a real quiet, silent assassin in that they have really focused and been really successful, and they're growing still, even though it's been a difficult period for them. And what I really admire about them actually, top through bottom, is their pursuit of, accountability, of progress, of drive, and really working together, very humble as a team. So I think those 3 or 4 examples are excellent. So thank you very much for your time, Danny. I'll let you leave now. So what we should be moving into now is a pre-recorded video from the brilliant Matt Hinks, who's one of our resourcing partners. And Matt was talking about the kind of ongoing widening skills gap. We all know it's really tough. And I think more and more companies are realizing that we can't be reactive in recruitment. It costs us a lot, and in terms of time delays and cash. What we need to do is really start to get ahead of that. But what we will do, because we'll be mindful of your time, is share the link to that video with you immediately after this session. So please give that a watch. It's about 6 or 7 minutes long, and there's some really good stuff in there from Matt. So apologies, Matt, you're not getting your 5 minutes of fame on here, but we will get the video out. So what I would like to do at this point then is invite Katie into the room. So whilst we are getting Katie into the room, we're now into the 3rd phase. So this is, hopefully we stabilize as a business, we're well protected, the business is viable, and actually we're progressing forward. Now it's about really getting back on track and thinking about long-term progression. Diversity and inclusion, I think we're quite lucky in the tech sector that we are a lot more open and accepting of the benefits of diversity and inclusion, whereas some sectors that, likes of I have worked in the past, for example, it's still something that we're having to engage people on. So I think the acceptance is there. But really, again, coming back to how do we turn something like our commitment to diversity and inclusion into benefits and outcomes to the business? That's something that I know Katie is doing a lot of work with tech companies on through her company BCohco. So I'd just like to invite Katie, who's going to spend the next sort of 7 or 8 minutes talking to us about DICE. Can you hear me?
I can, Martin. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. So I will switch over to your presentation and just tell me to move a slide when you're ready.
Excellent, thank you. So Katie from BCohco, and at BCohco, our ultimate goal is to support organisations to build cohesive communities internally and externally. We offer a learning development programme that centres on diversity, inclusion, cohesion and equality. DICE is what we call it. Working together to ensure your internal culture serves your customer. And I think with just the introduction you outlaid there, Martin, diversity moving forward, when we do get beyond what we're holding in the change that we're absolutely in at the moment, that in how we can harness creativity and innovation within our teams and within the communities that we serve is going to be essential. I have a background in building sustainable communities. I've developed programs for local authorities around equality and diversity. I feel very passionately about equality and diversity work because of my own intersections, my own dual heritage, my own womanhood. I think it's very important that people get in tune with their own intersections. So unfortunately, we've seen COVID completely exacerbate inequalities. We've seen older people be left out of contingency plans. We've seen women, single mothers, victims of poverty, victims of domestic violence. We've seen people of colour disproportionately affected by COVID, and Black Lives Matters protests erupt internationally. We have an issue with bias. We have an issue with systemic bias. Okay, so that learning development program that we offer is centred on DICE. If you can move to the next slide, please. So diversity for us is the mosaic of difference, is the mosaic of variety that any kind of organisation or community can embrace and celebrate. Inclusion is that invitation to the table, that invitation to get involved, and that willingness to get involved. And cohesion is the working, learning together and performing together, okay? All underpinned by qualities. If I can have the next slide. But be mindful, well, equalities, is essentially what we all seek. Equalities is offering the same solution or tools and techniques to all. Whereas I am particularly fond of the equity approach, which provides those that don't necessarily start on the same place in that playing field, and provides that level playing field by giving people those stepping stones. The top picture here, I don't know if you can see it, but the adjudicator's asking for everybody to climb the tree, and another depiction of equality. The question's equal, but the task is not, and everybody in that row would need a reasonable adjustments in this case to be able to achieve, or self-actualize. Okay, next slide, please. So, and it's important to recognise that what's going on a macro level is affecting us within our businesses, was affecting us on a community level. And our learning and development programme, I think what's really quite unique about it and quite important is that the skills that are developed on a personal and professional level can be used within your organisations and within your communities. These are skills, these are core competencies, and I know that this kind of briefly been touched upon what the future of core competencies look like, because this is included in that. Okay, this is being competent and being able to communicate eloquently on matters of DICE is going to be essential. So the business case for DICE, what is it? Now, I know unfortunately, you can't see that slide properly. And I wanted to do a little bit of an exercise with this. So we're thinking about organizational sustainability, okay? Why? How do we create inclusive cultures and inclusive environments? And what does it lead to? So I'm just going to give you the audience 30 seconds. Martin, it might be that this comes through your chat box, but if you can just maybe throw out some suggestions as to why the audience thinks that what the benefits of embracing DICE, what will it lead to?
So I'm just going to jump off my slides because I can't see the chat box, so hopefully I can jump to that.
Yeah. Is there anything coming through? Any suggestions?
I can't see them, unfortunately, so you're about to switch on to
no, that's fine, because
your next bit.
We'll push for time, so it's fine. So basically what we need to think about is staff satisfaction and staff commitment. Okay, staff retention, staff productivity, welcoming diverse perspectives to allow for that creativity and that innovation, client satisfaction, quality services, okay, a better understanding of the client. Next slide, please. Ultimately, it comes down to the values versus the business case, okay? Is it the right thing to do? Is it the clever thing to do? Will it improve our bottom line? You know, that it would be reassuring to know that an organization has done it not as a tokenistic gesture, but as something that they really want to embed into their values and principles as an organization. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the World Economic Forum says that, reports that organizations will outperform industry peers by 25 to 30%, 36% in profitability if principles of privacy are embraced and embedded. Innovation up by 20%, and decision making and spotting and reducing business risk up by 30%. So incredibly important. And those organizations not doing it, not taking it seriously, not looking to embed it, can look to trail behind their industry peers by 29%. Okay, so I just want to emphasize the innovation and the creativity, okay, the knowledge transfer across protected characteristics, the idea synthesis that can take place. You know, this is a new territory that we are exploring, you know, that you know, 2020 has pushed us in the direction of really reevaluating how we approach this. So embracing diversity, exploring said intersections and adapting. Okay, so next slide, please. So just in the interest of kind of our current circumstances and what's happening for us right now with the second lockdown, I think it's really important to recognise that, you know, with our staff, that especially where there might be protected characteristics, that we've carried out a risk assessment, you know, that we're checking in with people regularly, that the internal open communication channels are live, active and being used, that there are regular meetings and peer support structures in place, and more frequent supervisions, if not one-to-ones. And remember, for yourself, when you're at home and you're working, that you're setting boundaries, that you're creating a routine, and that you're eating healthily, you're staying hydrated, taking breaks, and you're keeping active. Easier said than done, I know. Add your 5 a day, 2 litres of water while you're at it. Okay, so that's just a little something. If people want to reach out, those are my details and my handles.
That's brilliant. Come off mute. That's brilliant. Thank you, Katie. And sorry, I switched over from your handles, but we've got your details at the end, actually, and we'll make sure that everyone receives those from you, because I know you equally also, you're always happy to jump on a call and talk to people more generally about their diversity and inclusion agenda. So thank you very much for that. And I think, you know, for me, you know, again, we are, I think, in our sector, a lot more open, which is fantastic, but we are still a white male dominated sector. And it's really good to see some initiatives around females and people with difficult backgrounds and, you know, disabilities and things like that, created, you know, more opportunities. And I think, as you have said, the spotlight has been put on the challenges that a lot of members of our society face throughout COVID. And I think the critical responsibility for all of us is that we don't let it become something that was highlighted during COVID. It's actually something that, you know, is a positive means for change going forward.
It just reminds me, Martin, as well, that you've got 2 layers really within the tech industry as well. You've got the kind of internal culture and you've got the product development angle. You know that with Amazon, there were recently with their recruitment process and their shortlisting processes, they didn't realise, but they were inadvertently excluding women from the process. And you've got the Microsoft Tabot as well that learned to be racist overnight.
Yeah,
following, you know, social patterns out there in the you know, in the social media arena. So it's that's kind of, you know, there are those layers to embracing DICE within your organization.
Yeah. Absolutely. Fantastic as always, Katie. Thank you very much. So we reached the sort of final hurdle, really, and, you know, we are running over a little bit, as we said, but really, you know, the trending challenges that we're facing, not just in the tech sector, but across the broader economy. First and foremost, about protecting and keeping our business alive and looking after our people. So some really good insights there around redundancy restructures, and then also protecting mental health as well. And then that real focus forward on how do we become cohesive, and how do we make sure we are achieving the outputs and the productivity that we need. And some really good examples from Danny there, which was fantastic. And then the video that you didn't see, but we will share with you straight afterwards, was the video from Matt, which we encourage you to look at, about how companies can navigate the widening skills gap in tech. Some really good things in there. And then as we're sort of, this is about the long term. This is not sort of short term things we're focused on now. We're looking at the role of DICE, which was brilliant. And then the final part of that, actually really positive trend. It seems a bit weird to call this a pain, but actually developing and promoting our best people has become a real trend at the moment, where, be it through means of giving people focus and, something to strive towards to hopefully create stability in the culture, or actually because a lot of companies are growing and there's some positive symptoms that are coming out of the industry at the moment. A lot of companies are sort of facing that challenge around investing in their hierarchy, investing in their OD, and actually starting to promote and develop their best people. So we have a short video which we're going to play at the end. Before I do that, because I know that we're going to run over slightly, I just want to thank you, everyone who's been on the panel, and also thank everyone who has joined us today. All of this has been recorded, so we'll share those videos on for you. But on the screen right now are the contact details. We'll make sure you get those contact details sent to you as well if you want to reach out to any of us. So at this point, we're going to play for the next, I think it's a 7-minute video from myself, as if you haven't heard enough, around developing and promoting our best people into leadership positions. If you do have to go, thanks for joining, and we'll make sure you get the recording sent to you. But by all means, stay, and then if there's an opportunity for us to talk at the end, if you want, please join us in one of the rooms thereafter. So just finally, on the theme of how businesses who are growing again can be production force for good, this trending topic is really about building leadership teams and how we need to make sure that the actions we take now really are right for us going forward. If there's any volume issues, just let me know.
I don't think we're getting your sound, Martin.
Sorry, I just heard Ben saying you're not getting the sound through on that one. So yeah, I don't think we'll be able to resolve that right here. So what we'll do, in the same way with the recruitment one, we will share that with you via a link, and please have a watch of that video as well. So let's move back to the audience and the panel, and just say thank you very much for joining us over the last an hour. Some really insightful things. Clearly, challenges, trending pain points around people are also huge opportunities for us as an organization if we respond, react, and prevent these pain points going forward. So by all means, reach out to anyone who's on the panel today who'd be happy to have a chat with you about any of your specific areas. And thank you for joining. And I believe